Did I understand it correctly that it would be virtually impossible for Ukraine to produce a hydrogen bomb?
Oh, virtually impossible. Yeah, I mean, and why? Why would you want to? If you have a fission bomb, that one fission bomb can destroy a city like Hiroshima, why would you build a hydrogen bomb? It's a waste of time and money and effort and very, very difficult.
This week is the 30-year anniversary of the Budapest Memorandum. It's an agreement under which Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons that it inherited from the Soviet Union. So basically, can you explain what this memorandum did and what's your opinion on it?
I would look at the memorandum from a technical point of view. From the point of view of the weapons themselves, Belarus and Kazakhstan gave them up quickly, recognizing they weren't of much value. Ukraine held on for 4 or 5 years, I think, before they finally said, we're going to give them up. And what that meant is after 4 or 5 years, the weapons were becoming pretty much useless. They wouldn't have worked anymore. They have a limited life radioactive material in them called tritium. And if the tritium was allowed to decay for 4 or 5 years, those weapons were reaching the point where they wouldn't have worked at all. Oh, they would have worked. They would have given 1% maybe of what they were supposed to do. And that would only be if people could bypass the codes and interlocks in them. So the Budapest Memorandum, while people say, oh, we gave up our weapons 30 years ago, if we still had them, look where we'd be, that's ridiculous. The weapons were almost completely useless by the time that Ukraine gave them up. The others gave them up while they still worked, but even then, they wouldn't have worked for very long. If you can't produce new tritium and put tritium into these bombs, they won't work as designed. If you are a state that wants to build nuclear weapons, nuclear materials are the big problem, right? So if Ukraine had kept them and was smart enough to take them apart and just take the plutonium or uranium out of them, then they could have built their own weapons from scratch. And I think Ukraine is smart enough to do that. But they didn't do that. They gave them up.
Ukraine had nuclear weapons as part of the Soviet Union. Can Ukraine profit from this Soviet legacy in terms of nuclear weapons?
But my understanding is that the Soviet Russian Republic didn't share anything about the bombs at all with any of the other republics. So it was the Russian Republic that retained the knowledge to build a bomb, and the other republics built delivery systems and rockets and missiles and things like that, but they had nothing to do with the nuclear explosive part themselves. So that's my understanding, is that all of that intellectual capital remained in Russia. I don't know of any reason to believe that Ukraine knew how to build a bomb based upon that relationship.
So basically, since nuclear bombs were produced in Russia, Ukraine did not have access to them, but there is this argument that Ukraine has nuclear power plants, it has uranium. Is that relevant for a nuclear bomb?
It's relevant in that uranium is absolutely essential. So the uranium you mine from the ground is your starting point. If you don't have that, then you have nothing. Unless you buy it from someone. Let's assume that that's difficult. Then you have to enrich the uranium, because only less than 1% of what you mine from the ground is useful for a bomb. And so that's a really big step. There's a lot of chemistry, a lot of mechanical engineering, just a lot of general engineering that has to be done. That is somewhat relevant to the nuclear power plants, but the plants that Ukraine has right now don't require applying that knowledge. The power plant itself, then you have a lot of people who are probably very skilled at doing calculations that would be relevant and interesting. There are a whole set of other calculations and design things that are not used in nuclear power plants, and the people in nuclear power plants would have to learn from zero, from scratch.
If Ukraine had decided in the 90s to create its own nuclear bomb, if there had been such a political decision, it might have been possible. Is that correct?
Yeah, if they had been smart enough to say, we're not giving these back, and we're going to take them apart and mine the uranium and plutonium that's in them and build our own weapons from scratch, then you and I talked a few minutes ago that that would be a project that would take a couple of years. And if they had mined plutonium and uranium out of the weapons that they had, melt them down and start over, in a couple of years they could have built some primitive ones on their own. But that's long past us. That's in the rearview mirror, and that's a chance that has definitely escaped. If you don't have nuclear material, you can think all you want, you can make all the drawings you want, do all the calculations, but you need the material. The technology to build, let's say, a simple implosion bomb was developed in 1944. It was developed by people who had mechanical adding machines and slide rules to do the mathematics, and they succeeded pretty quickly in building something that weighed several thousand kilograms and was bigger than this. But that's primitive, and that certainly was extremely effective. Within a few years, by 1950, they had reduced the size greatly and reduced the weight greatly. So if you think from 1950 to 2024, I think they should be capable. And certainly Ukraine is an advanced country.
And you mentioned that it would be much easier to produce some kind of uranium fission bomb, which is like the most primitive type, as far as I understand.
It was done at Hiroshima. It really hasn't done much since because it's so expensive. It takes so much material. Now, uranium is much easier to work with, and uranium can be produced in centrifuges without having any reactors or reprocessing. Plutonium bomb, you have to have a reactor to produce the plutonium. You have to run it in a certain way. So going the plutonium route seems to me to be very unlikely that somebody would do that in the short term.
I'm not suggesting that it should be produced, but what would be the timeline for a primitive uranium bomb?
Given that it was done in about 18 months back in 1944-45, I would say that it should be equally possible to do it in 18 months or 2 years. But that presumes that you have a large effort also going to producing the uranium. So you'd have to be mining uranium somewhere or buying it somewhere, and then doing some chemical processing and building centrifuges and putting it into centrifuges. That's at least a couple of year project as well. But they can be done in parallel. A couple of years.
Did I understand it correctly that it would be virtually impossible for Ukraine to produce a hydrogen bomb?
Oh, virtually impossible. Yeah, I mean, and why? Why would you want to? If you have a fission bomb, that one fission bomb can destroy a city like Hiroshima, why would you build a hydrogen bomb? It's a waste of time and money and effort and very, very difficult.
Can I ask you about like basically sanctions that could be imposed on Ukraine if it decides to develop nuclear weapons, or you don't want to comment on that?
They're a signature to the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the minute it became obvious that Ukraine was actually developing weapons, I think there would be a huge international outrage. It'd be an outrage because they're violating the treaty, but there'd also be an outrage because that would really increase the chances of some kind of nuclear war in the region. So to me, I think it would be just unthinkable that if anybody figured out that Ukraine was in the business of building some nuclear weapons, there wouldn't be a huge, very negative reaction.
So there is no way, you think there is no way that, some Western countries could actually either support it or turn a blind eye?
I'm not a diplomat, but support it, I think the chances are 0.000. Turn a blind eye? In today's world, the people who turn blind eyes are the Russians, and the Russians are not going to turn a blind eye on this particular problem. So, no, I don't think there's anybody in the industrial West who would turn a blind eye.
So now, in the 21st century, in 2024, are nuclear weapons more of a political weapon or a practical one?
I'll go with political. People say that Putin is threatening to use them, and it's very hard to see how he could really use them in an event in a country that's flat with lots of farmlands and all. Yeah, one nuclear weapon could kill a lot of Ukrainian troops. But then what was the point of that? Spread out troops and armor are not particularly amenable to being hit with a nuclear weapon. Nuclear weapons are designed to destroy cities, which I don't think Russia wants to destroy the cities of Ukraine, or they're designed to attack other people's nuclear weapons. Most of those weapons that you had in Ukraine before they were given back were targeted on American nuclear weapons. So they were trying to kill American nuclear weapons before the Americans could launch their nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons in a battlefield like you have right now, I think are fairly useless except as a political deterrent. I mean, if Russia uses them first, the Americans have to decide how they would respond. And if the weapons are used only on Ukraine, I think the Americans would be very reluctant to attack Mother Russia and then trade Chicago and New York for Moscow. And so, no, I don't think so. I think it would change the world's balance for decades to come if even one is used in the Ukraine war. But I don't think it necessarily means the end of the world.
Thank you for watching this video. For the Kyiv Independent's birthday last month, we started a campaign to reach 1,000 new members. With your help, we just got there. Thank you for your trust. Our campaign ends next week, so you can still join. The more members we get, the more we can do to bring news from Ukraine to the world.